The first time she asked if there was space in my bed, I should have laughed it off and told her she was out of her mind. Instead, I stood there in the middle of my kitchen with my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking the cabinets, and all I could think was that I had been waiting for her to ask something like that from the second she showed up in my life. My name is Noah. I am 25 and I live alone in a small house outside Asheville, North Carolina. It sits at the end of a narrow road with cracked pavement and leaning mailboxes, where the trees grow thick and the nights get so quiet you can hear rain moving through the woods before it reaches the roof. I work as a carpenter for a local contractor. Most days I build porches, fix stairs, frame rooms, and try to make old places stand strong again. It is honest work. It pays enough to keep the lights on and the truck running. And most of the time that feels like more than enough for a guy like me. The house I live in used to belong to my grandfather. He left it to me when he passed, along with his tools, his worn workbench, and an old iron bed frame that still sits in the spare room because I never found a reason to move it. The place is not much to look at from the road. The paint is faded. The front steps lean a little to one side. The porch groans when someone crosses it too fast. But it is mine, and after the kind of life I had growing up, having something that stays put matters more to me than fancy floors or shiny appliances. My parents split when I was young. My mom moved from town to town with whatever man she thought would fix her life. My dad was the kind of person who promised to call and never did, so I learned early that quiet was better than disappointment. Quiet never said it loved you and then disappeared. That is why most of my life is simple. I wake up before sunrise, pull on jeans and boots, drink coffee from the same old blue mug, and head to whatever job site needs me that day. I measure twice, cut once, keep my head down, and come home tired enough that dinner is usually eggs, toast, or whatever I can heat up without thinking too hard. In the evenings, I work in the shed out back, sanding down old wood or fixing chairs I find at yard sales. There is something about making broken things useful again that settles me. Wood makes sense. It splits where pressure lies. It softens if you give it time. It can be shaped without lying to you first. People are not always like that. The night she came to my door, the sky looked mean from the start. Cold wind had been pushing at the windows since sunset, and by 10 the rain was coming down so hard it sounded like handfuls of gravel hitting the roof. I had a lamp on in the kitchen and an old country song playing low on the radio while I tried to fix a loose chair leg at the table. The power had flickered twice already. The whole house smelled like sawdust, coffee, and wet earth drifting in through a crack near the back door. I remember thinking I should probably go to bed early in case the weather got worse. Then I heard the knock. At first, I thought it was just a branch hitting the porch rail. Nobody comes out this way late at night unless they are lost or their truck died. Then it came again. 3 soft knocks close together, careful and uncertain. I set the chair down and listened. The rain kept pounding the roof. The radio hummed under it. Then a 4th knock came, a little stronger this time, like whoever was out there had almost given up and then decided to try once more. I walked to the front door with more caution than speed. My hand stayed on the knob for a second before I opened it. She was standing under the weak yellow porch light with rain dripping from the ends of her hair and soaking through a thin gray sweater that looked like it had not been warm enough even before the storm started. She looked about my age, maybe younger. Her dark blonde hair was stuck to her cheeks. Her jeans were wet from the knees down. She had one hand wrapped around her own elbow like she was trying to hold herself together, and in the other she carried a small leather bag that looked too nice for the road she was standing on. Her face was pale from the cold, but her eyes were steady. Blue, clear, and tired in a way that made my chest tighten before she even said a word. "Sorry to bother you," she said, voice shaky from the cold but still controlled. "My car broke down about a mile back. I walked until I saw your porch light. Can I use your phone?" Every instinct I had told me to be careful. I live alone. I do not open my door to strangers in the middle of the night, but she did not look dangerous. She looked frozen and proud and one bad minute away from falling apart. "Yeah," I said, stepping back. "Come in before you turn to ice." She gave one small nod and stepped inside. Cold air and rain came in with her. Water dotted the wooden floor under her boots. She looked around the living room fast, not nosy, just alert, as if she needed to understand a room before she could breathe in it. I grabbed a towel from the hall closet and handed it to her. "Here," I said. "Phone's in the kitchen." "Thank you," she said, and the way she said it made it sound like she was not used to needing help. She followed me into the kitchen, holding the towel around her shoulders while I handed her my phone. Her fingers shook a little when she took it. I busied myself with the kettle because it felt strange just standing there watching her call somebody who probably should have been the one helping her in the first place. She dialed once, then again. No answer. Her mouth tightened a little more each time. After the third try, she lowered the phone and looked at the floor for a second before meeting my eyes. No one picked up. She said quietly. The kettle started to heat and steam curled up into the yellow light above the stove. Rain kept tapping hard against the window over the sink. She stood there dripping onto my kitchen floor, wrapped in one of my old towels, looking like she had walked out of a life much bigger than mine and gotten lost in the wrong storm. I should have told her I would call a tow truck and be done with it. I should have kept things simple. Instead, I heard myself say, "You can warm up here first, then we figure it out." Something flickered across her face then, relief maybe, or maybe it was the first crack in whatever wall had kept her standing upright this long. "I'm Ava," she said after a second. "Noah," I answered, and that was how it started. Not with fireworks or fate or some line a person remembers forever. Just rain on the roof, a stranger in my kitchen, and a feeling I did not have words for yet. Only the strange and sudden sense that the quiet life I had built for myself had just been interrupted in a way that was not going to be temporary. Ava stood near the kitchen doorway while I poured hot water into 2 mugs. I found a box of tea in the cabinet that had probably been there for months and dropped the bags in, then opened the fridge and stared at what little I had inside. Eggs, butter, half a loaf of bread, some leftover stew from the night before. Not much, but enough to keep someone from going hungry. When I glanced back at her, she was still standing in the same spot, shoulders tight, like she was waiting for me to change my mind and tell her to leave. "You can sit," I said. "Nobody's grading you." A small smile touched her mouth at that. She eased into one of the chairs at the table, still wrapped in the towel, still dripping rainwater onto the floor. I set a mug in front of her and she wrapped both hands around it right away. She closed her eyes for 1 second as the heat reached her fingers. It was such a small thing, but the look on her face made it feel bigger, like warmth itself had been hard to find for a while. "Thank you," she said again. "Really." I leaned against the counter with my own mug. "So your car broke down. What kind?" She looked up at me over the rim of the cup. "A silver Audi." I gave a quiet whistle before I could stop myself. "That explains the bag." She blinked. "The bag," I nodded toward the leather one by her chair, "looks expensive." Her eyes dropped to it and a strange look passed over her face, not pride, something closer to annoyance. "It was a gift," she said, "not one I asked for." That answer sat between us for a second. I could have pushed. I did not. I knew what it felt like to be tired of being read by the things around you. Instead, I pulled out a skillet and cracked a few eggs into it. The sound filled the room. Butter hissed. The radio kept playing low from the living room, some slow old song my grandfather used to like. Ava watched me cook like it surprised her that I could. "You do this often?" she asked. "Feed strangers in storms?" I snorted. "No, mostly I feed myself, and even that is hit or miss." That got a real laugh out of her. Soft, tired, but real. The sound caught me off guard. It made the kitchen feel smaller in a good way. We ate at the table while the storm worked itself out outside. I gave her the stew and toast, and she acted like it was better than anything from a restaurant. After a few bites, some of the color came back to her face. Her hair was drying in loose waves around her shoulders now. She had sharp cheekbones and tired eyes and a kind of careful grace in every movement. Like she came from a world where people watched how you held a fork and what shoes you wore, but there was nothing cold about her. Under all that control, she seemed worn thin. "So," I said after a while, "who were you calling?" She looked down at her tea. "My fiancé." The word hit harder than it should have. I had known her for maybe 20 minutes. It made no sense for that one word to land in my chest the way it did, but it did. I kept my face still. He didn't answer. "No," she said. "He usually does when other people are watching." I frowned a little. What does that mean? Ava let out a breath and turned the mug slowly in her hands. "It means he is very good at looking like the right kind of man, charming, successful, always knows what to say in public. My parents love him, everyone does." She lifted her eyes to mine. "When it's just us, he's different." I set my fork down. "Different how?" She hesitated long enough that I almost told her not to answer if she did not want to. Then she spoke in a voice that sounded steady only because she was forcing it to stay that way. "Controlling, always correcting me, telling me what to wear, where to be, how to talk to people. He says it's because he wants what is best for me. My parents say the same thing. Tonight we had dinner with both families. He announced a wedding date I never agreed to." She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Everyone smiled like it was the happiest moment of my life. I walked out before dessert. I got in my car, drove until the storm got bad and the engine died on me out here. My jaw tightened. There were a lot of things I could have said. Most of them were not polite. Instead I asked, "Does he know where you are?" She shook her head. "No, I left my phone in the car when I went back to check the engine. By the time I found it, the battery was dead and I was soaked. Then I saw your light." She looked around my kitchen at the old cabinets and the scratches in the table and the mug in her hands. "I know this probably sounds dramatic." "No," I said before she could go any further. "It sounds like you need it out." Her eyes lifted to mine again, and that same strange feeling moved through me, like she was not used to someone hearing her the first time. The storm kept us there longer than either of us planned. By midnight the rain had not eased, and the weather report on the radio said part of the road near the highway was already flooding. I grabbed the old flashlight from the drawer and stepped onto the porch to look out, mostly to clear my head. The yard was a dark sheet of moving water and wind. The trees at the edge of the property swayed hard enough to make the branches hiss. There was no way I was sending her back out into that. When I came inside, Ava was standing by the sink, staring at the rain through the window like she hated needing an answer from me. "You're not driving anywhere tonight," I said. "Road's a mess." She turned slowly. "I can sleep in my car." "No, you can't." I did not mean for it to come out that sharp, but it did. I rubbed a hand over the back of my neck and tried again. "Look, there's a spare room. Bed's old, but it works. You can stay here till morning." "I'll go check your car then." She opened her mouth like she was ready to argue, then closed it again. Pride was fighting with common sense on her face. Common sense won. "Okay," she said quietly. "Just for tonight." "Just for tonight," I repeated, though something in me already doubted it would be that simple. I found one of my clean shirts and a pair of sweatpants that would probably be too big for her, then left them outside the bathroom door. When she came out 10 minutes later, my shirt hung nearly to her thighs and the sleeves swallowed half her hands. Her hair was damp but brushed back from her face now. She looked softer without the wet sweater and the sharp edge she had carried in from the storm. More human, more tired. I showed her the spare room, which was really just a small bedroom with my grandfather's iron bed, a quilt my aunt made years ago, and an old dresser with one handle missing. She stood in the doorway for a second, taking it in. "This is nice," she said. "It smells like cedar." "Closets lined with it," I said. "My granddad swore it kept everything honest." She smiled at that in a way that made me want to hear it again. I should have gone straight to bed. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen washing dishes that did not need washing while she moved around in the other room. I could hear soft footsteps, the creak of the bed, then quiet. The house felt different with another person in it. Not crowded, not wrong, just less hollow. When I finally turned off the kitchen light and headed down the hall, I paused at her door. It was cracked open an inch. I could see the lamp glow inside. "You okay?" I asked softly. There was a second of silence, then her voice came back just as soft. "Yeah, I just haven't slept somewhere that felt peaceful in a long time." I stood there with my hand on the door frame, not knowing why that sentence hit me so hard. "Good night, Ava," I said. "Good night, Noah." I did not sleep much. Rain and old memories have always been a bad mix for me, and now there was also the fact that a woman with a fiancé and sad eyes was sleeping down the hall in my grandfather's bed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm weaken little by little. Around 3 in the morning, I got up, padded to the kitchen, and made coffee I did not need. On my way back, I noticed light under Ava's door again. Before I could decide whether to knock, the door opened. She stood there looking half asleep, hair loose around her face, my shirt wrinkled from sleep. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Same," I admitted. A minute later, we were sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with only the stove light on, drinking coffee while the house clicked and settled around us. There was something strange about being awake with someone when the whole world feels paused. People say more at that hour than they mean to. Ava traced the rim of her mug and said, "Do you ever feel like your life looks fine from the outside, but inside you can barely breathe?" I leaned back in my chair. Most of my life didn't even look fine from the outside. That made her smile a little. Then she looked at me and asked, "What happened to your parents?" I hesitated. But something about the hour and the way she asked made lying feel pointless. "Nothing dramatic all at once," I said. "They just left in different ways. Mom with bad choices, Dad with silence. My granddad raised me. After he died, this house got real quiet." She listened the way some people never do. No fake sympathy. No rush to fill the air. Just attention. It made me talk more than I usually would. I told her about learning to build things because it was easier than fixing feelings. About liking work because boards and nails do what they are told if you handle them right. About how I kept people at a distance because wanting them near never ended well. Ava looked down into her coffee and said, "I think I have spent most of my life being told what the right future should look like. Perfect school, perfect man, perfect wedding. Everyone keeps saying I am lucky. And maybe from the outside I am. But every time I picture marrying him, it feels like I am watching somebody else get locked in a room." The words hung there between us. I should have looked away. I did not. She did not either. Her eyes were tired, yes, but there was also something else in them now. Something open. Something that made the air feel warmer than it should have at 3 in the morning. The house was quiet. The storm had thinned to a soft rain. We sat there with our mugs and our half-finished truths, and for one stupid second I forgot she belonged to another life. I forgot she had a ring. I forgot she would probably leave in the morning and take whatever this strange feeling was with her. All I saw was a woman in my kitchen who looked more like herself in my old shirt than she probably ever did in whatever expensive life waited for her. Then her hand moved on the table. Not much. Just enough that her fingers brushed mine where they rested near my mug. It could have been an accident. Maybe it was, but neither of us pulled away right away. My chest tightened. Her breath caught just slightly. When she finally drew her hand back, she stood so fast the chair legs scraped the floor. "I should try to sleep," she said, voice quieter now. "Yeah," I said, though my voice sounded rough to my own ears. "Probably." She took 2 steps toward the hall, then stopped and looked back at me. Her expression was unreadable for a second. Then she said, "Thank you for tonight, Noah, not just for the room, for making this place feel safe." Before I could answer, she disappeared down the hall and closed the bedroom door behind her. I sat there another 10 minutes staring at the place where her hand had touched mine, feeling like something had shifted under my feet. The next morning came gray and cold. I was already outside by the time Ava woke, throwing a tarp and toolbox into the back of my truck. The rain had eased to mist, and the road still shone dark from the storm. When she stepped onto the porch in my borrowed clothes, holding 2 mugs of coffee, something in me went still for a second. She looked like she belonged there in a way that made no sense. Too easy, too dangerous. "You always start work this early?" she asked, handing me a mug. "Only when a stranger with a fancy car ends up in my spare room," I said. She smiled, and for a moment the whole yard seemed warmer. We drove back along the road until we found her Audi angled on the shoulder near a ditch, one tire flat and the hood still warm from the abuse she had given it trying to restart it in the storm. I crouched by the wheel while Ava stood nearby hugging my flannel around herself against the cold. "Bad news," I said after a minute. "Tires shredded and the batteries drained. Good news is I can fix both." "You can?" she asked. "I build things for a living. I like being useful." She looked at me with that same quiet focus from the night before. "You are," she said, and the way she said it made the simple words feel like more than thanks. It took me an hour to change the tire, jump the battery, and make sure the engine would hold long enough to get her back to town. By the time I closed the hood, my hands were dirty and Ava was standing closer than before, like she had stopped thinking of me as a stranger somewhere between the coffee and the cold road. "So this is it," she said softly. I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded. "Looks that way." She glanced toward her car, then back at me. Her eyes held for a second on my face, like she wanted to say something and was not sure if she had the right. "I don't want to go back yet," she admitted. The morning air felt suddenly thinner. "Then don't," I said before I could stop myself. Her brows lifted slightly. "What?" I shrugged, trying to keep my voice even. "There's a diner about 15 minutes from here. Best pancakes in the county if you don't mind sticky tables. We could get breakfast before you head back to your life." Ava looked at me for a long second, and in that look I felt the same pull from the night before, only stronger now. "Okay," she said at last. "Breakfast sounds good." She followed me back to my truck instead of getting into her own car, and I told myself not to read too much into that. But when she climbed in beside me and shut the door, bringing with her the smell of coffee, cedar soap, and something soft I could not name, I had the strange and sudden thought that whatever this was, it was not ending with one stormy night. It was only starting to get dangerous. Breakfast at the diner should have felt like a small thing. Just coffee, pancakes, and a little more time before Ava went back to the life waiting for her. But the second we walked in together, with the bell over the door jingling and the smell of syrup and bacon filling the air, it felt like we had stepped into some version of a morning I had no business wanting. The place was warm and bright after the cold road. Red vinyl booths lined the windows. A waitress with silver hair and reading glasses hanging on a chain called me honey and slid 2 menus onto a table near the back like she had seen 100 people trying not to stare at each other the way Ava and I were. Ava sat across from me and tucked her damp hair behind one ear. My flannel still hung on her shoulders. She looked out of place in the diner and completely right at the same time. "You come here a lot?" she asked, glancing around. "Enough that they know I like my coffee strong and my pancakes plain," I said. She smiled. "Plain pancakes, that tells me almost everything I need to know about you." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, like what?" "That you are either very simple or very stubborn." I let out a low laugh. "Both, probably." The waitress came by and poured coffee without asking. Ava looked at her mug like it was some kind of rescue. We ordered pancakes, eggs, and bacon. Though Ava said she was not very hungry, that lasted about 3 minutes. The second the food came, she took one bite and closed her eyes like she had just tasted religion. "Okay," she said, pointing her fork at me. "You did not warn me these were this good." I leaned back in the booth and watched her for a second longer than I should have. "Told you." There was an ease between us that morning that should not have been there. We had only known each other since the night before. And still it felt like something in both of us had relaxed. Maybe it was because the worst of the storm had passed. Maybe it was because neither of us wanted to talk about where she had to go after breakfast. So instead we talked about smaller things. She asked how I got into carpentry. I told her about my grandfather teaching me how to use a level before I was tall enough to see over the workbench. I asked why she had agreed to get engaged to a man she clearly did not love. She looked down at her plate for a second before answering. "I kept thinking if I stayed still long enough, everything would start to feel normal," she said. "My parents love him. He comes from the right family. He says all the right things in front of people. For a while I convinced myself being unsure was just me being difficult. And now," she looked up at me, "now I think I was trying to survive my own life by pretending it belonged to someone else." The words sat with me. She said them simply, but I could hear how long she had been carrying them. "You don't have to go back to that today," I said before I had fully decided to say it. Ava's eyes moved over my face, searching for something. What would I do instead? I should have said I did not know. I should have told her that breakfast was one thing but stepping into her mess was another. That getting involved with an engaged woman was the kind of mistake that leaves scars. Instead I found myself saying, "Come with me for the day." She blinked. "For the day? I've got work a house about 20 minutes from here, porch repair, nothing exciting, but it beats going straight back to people who make you feel like you can't breathe." A slow smile touched her mouth. "You're asking me to spend the day watching you fix wood." I took a sip of coffee. "I'm telling you it will be the highlight of your week." That made her laugh again, and there it was, that same strange warmth in my chest. "Okay," she said. One day, the job site was an old white farmhouse with a sagging front porch and flower beds that had gone empty for winter. The owner was an older widow named Mrs. Bell, who had lived there for 40 years and trusted me enough to hand over a spare key and disappear to her sister's house while I worked. Ava stood in the yard with her arms folded against the cold while I unloaded lumber from the truck. She looked around at the bare trees, the hills in the distance, the weathered boards, and then back at me with a look I could not quite read. "What?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. This is just very far from where I thought I'd be this morning." Disappointed, she met my eyes. "No, not even close. I should have gone back to work right then." Instead, I held her gaze for a second too long and felt that same dangerous pull low in my chest. So I turned away and got busy before I did something stupid like reach for her. Ava spent the first hour sitting on the porch steps with a cup of diner coffee in her hands, watching me pry up old boards and measure new ones. Every now and then she asked questions. Real questions, not the polite kind. Why one board warped and another held. Why cedar lasts longer. Why I always ran my thumb over the grain before cutting. It should not have mattered, but it did. Most people see work like mine and think only about the final result. Ava watched like the process mattered too. At one point I handed her a tape measure and asked her to hold the end while I marked a board. She stepped close, careful not to slip in the wet grass, and bent her head over the numbers with a kind of serious focus that made me smile. 9 feet 4.5, she said. Not bad. Are you surprised I can read a tape measure? I smirked. A little. She narrowed her eyes. You are lucky I am in your truck and not my own right now. Why's that? Because otherwise I would leave. I laughed. No, you wouldn't. She stared at me for one long second, then something softened in her face. No, she said quietly. I wouldn't. By noon the clouds had broken enough to let a little pale sunlight through. We sat on the back step of the farmhouse eating grilled cheese sandwiches from the diner wrapped in paper. Ava drew in a small sketchbook she had pulled from her bag while I ate. I leaned over once and saw quick lines that looked like the porch post, my tool belt, and the shape of my hands around a hammer. You drawing me? I asked. She shut the notebook halfway. Maybe. You any good? She gave me a look. You really are simple. I grinned. That a yes? She hesitated, then handed the sketchbook to me. The drawing was rough, unfinished, but it was good, more than good. Somehow she had caught the bend of my shoulders, the way my head dipped when I focused, even the old baseball cap I wore half the time. There was something intimate about it that caught me off guard. It was not just what I looked like. It felt like the way I must seem through her eyes, steady, quiet, safe. I handed the sketchbook back more carefully than I took it. That's really good, I said. Ava looked down at the page. I draw when I want to understand something. I should have asked what she was trying to understand about me. I did not. Maybe because I was not sure I wanted to hear the answer yet, or maybe because I already knew enough to be nervous. The rest of the afternoon slipped by too easily. She stayed while I finished the porch. She held boards, passed nails, and once smeared sawdust on her cheek without noticing. I reached out to brush it away before I thought better of it. My fingers touched her skin, just once, light, brief. But the second I did it, everything between us changed. Ava went still, her eyes lifted to mine. We were standing too close, a porch rail half-built beside us, hammer hanging loose in my hand. I could feel the warmth of her under my flannel, smell the clean soap she used, hear both of us breathing in the quiet yard. You had sawdust, I said. And even to me it sounded like a weak excuse. Thank you, she said, but she did not move back. Neither did I. Somewhere across the road a dog barked. A truck passed in the distance. Life kept moving, but inside that moment everything narrowed. Her mouth parted slightly like she was about to say something, then she looked down and stepped away. The air went cold all over again. I set the hammer down harder than I meant to. We should probably get you back, I said. Ava nodded, though she did not sound like she wanted that any more than I did. Yeah. The drive back to where her car was parked felt shorter than before and much quieter. She kept one hand resting on the seat between us like she wanted to reach over and did not know if she should. I kept both hands on the wheel and stared ahead harder than necessary. My brain had finally caught up with what my chest had known since the first knock on my door. I wanted her. Not in some passing way, not in a careless way. I wanted her laugh in my kitchen and her coffee cup on my counter and her face across the table at breakfast. I wanted things I had no right to want from a woman promised to somebody else. When we reached her car, neither of us moved right away. The engine idled. Wind pushed dry leaves across the shoulder. Ava looked at the windshield, then at her hands, then finally at me. "This was a really good day," she said softly. Was. I haven't had one of those in a while. Something in my chest tightened again. "Ava," she turned to me. I had no plan for what came next. I only knew that I was tired of pretending I did not feel what was standing between us. "You shouldn't come here if you're going to marry him," I said. The words came out lower and rougher than I meant them to. Honest, though. Not to my house, not with me. Her face changed. Not anger, hurt. Maybe because she knew I was right. "You think I don't know that?" she asked quietly. "I think you're in the middle of something messy and I'm the wrong place to hide from it." She held my gaze, and for a second I thought she might get out and slam the door and be done with me. Instead she asked, "Am I hiding, Noah?" I did not answer right away. The truth was I did not think she was. I thought she was reaching for air. I thought I had become part of that without meaning to. But I was scared of how much I wanted it to be true. "I don't know," I said finally. Ava nodded once like she expected that. Then she reached down and touched something at her left hand. It was the first time I had really looked there. A thin diamond ring caught the gray light. She twisted it slowly, slid it off, and held it in her palm. My pulse kicked hard. "He gave me this 6 months ago," she said. My mother cried. My father shook his hand. Everyone acted like my whole life had started. I put it on because saying no felt impossible. She closed her fingers around it and looked at me again. Today was the first time in a long time I felt like I was actually living my own day. There are moments when a person can feel the ground change before anything has really happened. This was one of them. "Ava," I said, but it came out almost like a warning. She opened the truck door, stepped out, then leaned back in with one hand on the frame. Wind moved her hair around her face. Her eyes held mine, steady and bright and full of something I was not ready for but wanted anyway. "I'm not going back to him tonight," she said. "I just needed you to know that." Then she straightened up, shut the door gently, and walked to her car. I watched her in the side mirror as she opened the driver's door, then stopped and looked back once. Not a wave, not a smile. Just one look that hit harder than either of those would have. Then she got in and drove away. I sat there with my hands still on the wheel long after her car disappeared around the bend. The truck felt too small. The day felt unreal. I told myself that was it, that I had done the smart thing by drawing a line before this turned into something worse. Then I drove home and found myself looking at the porch as if I expected her to be there already. The house was too quiet again. My coffee mug sat in the sink beside the one she had used that morning. One pale hair was still caught on the back of the spare room pillow. I stood in that room longer than I meant to, staring at the smooth dip in the quilt where she had slept, and felt something I had spent years avoiding settle in my chest. By evening, I was in the shed out back sanding down an old rocking chair just to keep my hands busy. The radio played low. The air smelled like pine dust and varnish. I had almost convinced myself I could outwork whatever was happening inside me when headlights swept across the yard. My whole body went tight. A black SUV rolled up to the house, too polished and expensive for my road, and stopped hard enough to throw gravel. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out in a dark coat that probably cost more than my truck needed in repairs last year. Even before I saw his face clearly, I knew who he was. He crossed the yard fast, anger in every step. He did not knock. He came straight to the shed, stopped in the doorway, and looked around at the tools and wood shavings like he had walked into a world beneath him. He was tall, neat, good-looking in the sharp, polished way some men build on purpose. The kind of man people trust before he says a word. His eyes landed on me and stayed there. "You're Noah," he said. I set the sanding block down slowly. "Who are you?" "You know who I am." His jaw tightened. I'm Daniel Mercer, Ava's fiancé. The word hit different coming from him than it had from her, colder, more like ownership than love. Rain started again outside, light at first, tapping the shed roof. I leaned one hand on the workbench and looked at him without rushing to answer. What do you want? He laughed once, short and mean. I think that's obvious. I want you to stop whatever this is. His eyes moved around the shed. Over the old tools, the chipped paint, the work clothes hanging on a nail. You think a woman like Ava belongs here, with you? There it was, not concern, not confusion, contempt. Every part of me wanted to throw him back into the rain, but anger is easier when you do not care what happens next. I cared, too much already. You should leave, I said. Instead, he stepped farther in. She disappeared after dinner last night. Then she came home this afternoon acting like she suddenly has choices. He gave me a tight smile that had no warmth in it. You filled her head with something. Whatever fantasy she's playing at, it ends now. I felt my hands curl into fists before I told them to. You don't get to talk about her like that, and you don't get to touch what is mine. The sentence hit so hard that, for 1 second, all I saw was red. I moved before I could think better of it. Crossing the space between us in 2 steps, Daniel straightened but did not back off. We stood close enough to smell each other's anger. She is not yours, I said, voice low and sharp. If she doesn't want you, that's got nothing to do with me, that's on you. Something flashed across his face then, not just anger, fear, quick, ugly, and gone, he knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to drive all the way out here in the rain and try to scare me off before she slipped out of his grip for good. You have no idea what kind of life you're stepping into, he said. Then maybe it's not yours to manage. For a second, I thought he might swing at me. Instead, he smoothed a hand over the front of his coat, recovering himself the way men like him do when they remember they care more about appearances than truth. He took one slow step back and looked me over like he was trying to decide whether I was worth hating or only worth pitying. This ends badly for you, he said. Men like you always think being decent is enough. It isn't. Then he turned and walked out into the rain. I stood in the shed doorway listening to his SUV tear back down the road, gravel spitting under the tires. The yard went still again. Rain tapped the tin roof. My chest felt tight enough to crack. I should have been relieved he was gone. Instead, I felt worse, because now it was real. Whatever this thing with Ava was, it had stepped out of the quiet and into the open, and men like Daniel do not drive into storms unless they know they are losing something. I went inside, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table where Ava had wrapped her hands around a mug the night before. I stared at the wood grain until the room blurred. This was exactly why I kept my life small. No drama, no promises, no chances to want something hard enough for it to hurt. And still somehow there I was thinking about her laugh, her sketchbook, the way she had looked at me in the truck with his ring in her hand. Outside, thunder rolled low over the hills. Then a few minutes later there was a knock at my front door, soft this time, familiar, careful. I stood so fast the chair scraped hard across the floor. My heart slammed once against my ribs. I knew that knock now. I would have known it anywhere. For 1 second I just stood there staring at the door while rain whispered against the porch. Then I walked toward it, every quiet rule I had lived by already breaking under my feet. I opened the door and Ava was standing there in the rain again, not soaked like the first night. This rain was lighter, more mist than storm, but it had still caught in her hair and darkened the shoulders of her coat. Her chest rose and fell too fast, like she had come straight from a fight and had not fully stepped out of it yet. In one hand she held her keys. In the other she held nothing at all. No ring, no careful smile, just herself. For a second neither of us said a word. The porch light cast a weak circle around her, and all I could think was that she looked more certain than she had the first time I saw her, even with her breathing uneven and her eyes bright. Then she looked past me into the house and back at me again. "He came here, didn't he?" she asked. I should have lied. I should have said no and kept her out of the middle of it, but she already knew. I could hear it in her voice. "Yeah," I said. "About 20 minutes ago." Her jaw tightened. I told him not to. I stepped aside without thinking. "Get in before you freeze." She came inside and shut the door behind her. The house felt smaller the second she was in it. Warmer, too. She stood in the living room looking tired and angry and somehow still beautiful in a way that made my chest hurt. I had spent the last hour trying to talk myself out of whatever this was. The second she came back, every one of those thoughts fell apart. "I ended it," she said. The words hit the room hard. No build-up, no careful lead-in, just the truth dropped between us. I stared at her. "Ava, I ended it," she repeated, slower this time. Like she needed me to hear all of it. "After I left you this afternoon, I went home. My mother was crying. My father was furious. Daniel was calm in that way he gets when he wants everyone else to look unstable. He kept saying we were just under stress, that I needed rest, that I was confused." Her mouth twisted with disgust. "He talked about me like I was not even in the room. Like I was some difficult business deal he could smooth over if he stayed charming long enough." I felt heat rise in my chest again at the thought of it. "What did you do?" She looked at me, and in that look I saw something I had not seen before. Not just fear, not just exhaustion, resolve. I took off the ring and put it on the table in front of all of them. Then I told him I was done. I told my parents I was done too, with the wedding, with the pretending, with all of it. My dad said if I walked out over this, I should not expect his money or his help again. My mom asked how I could throw my future away for one reckless day. Her voice thinned a little on that last line, but she held steady, and then I left. My throat felt tight. "You came here." She nodded once. "I came here." There are moments when the whole world narrows down to one answer. This was one of them. I knew I should say something careful, something practical. Ask her if she had a plan, if she had thought this through, if she was sure. But all the careful things in me had been losing ground since the first night she stepped into my kitchen wrapped in rain and pride. Still, I made myself ask the question that scared me most. "Ava, are you here because you need somewhere to hide tonight, or are you here because of me?" She took a step closer. Then another. She stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could see the tiny rain drops caught in her lashes. "I am here because of you," she said quietly. "And because of me too. Because I am tired of living a life that feels neat on the outside and empty inside. Because when I am here with you, I feel like I can breathe all the way down to my lungs. Because I have spent one day with you and one night in this house, and both felt more honest than the last 3 years of my life." My heart hit hard against my ribs. "Ava," her eyes searched mine. "If that scares you, tell me now. I can handle the truth better than I can handle being managed." That line almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it sounded so much like the woman I had already come to know. Proud even when she was shaken, brave even when she was scared. I lifted a hand and brushed a damp strand of hair back from her cheek. She closed her eyes for half a second at the touch. That was it. That was all it took to wipe out the distance I had been trying to keep. "It scares me," I admitted. "You scare me, not in a bad way, in a real way. I have spent years keeping my life small enough that nothing could wreck it. Then you show up in a storm and suddenly I can't stop thinking about what breakfast feels like with you at my table." A soft breath left her, almost a laugh, almost a cry. "Good," she whispered, "because you scare me too." I do not remember deciding to kiss her. I only remember that 1 second she was standing there looking at me like truth was the only thing left between us, and the next my hand was at her waist, and her fingers were gripping my shirt, and her mouth was on mine. The kiss was nothing like the kind people talk about in stories. It was not polished or slow or perfect. It was relief and want and fear and hope all at once. It was two people who had both been holding too much finally setting some of it down. She kissed me back like she meant it, like this was not a mistake, like she had made a choice and was not running from it. Her coat was cool from the rain, but her mouth was warm. My other hand came up to her face, and she made this small sound in the back of her throat that nearly undid me. When we pulled apart, we stayed close, foreheads almost touching, both breathing like we had run somewhere hard. "I wanted to do that all day," she murmured. I let out a shaky breath. "You picked a hell of a complicated day for it." That got a real smile out of her, small but real. "Yeah," she said, "I know." I took her coat and hung it by the door. Then I led her to the kitchen because I did not know what else to do with feelings this big except make coffee and stand near her while the kettle heated. Some habits run deeper than logic. Ava sat at the table where she had sat the night before, only now the air between us was different. Charged, yes, but also softer, like we had finally stopped lying to ourselves about what was happening. While the coffee brewed, she looked around the kitchen slowly at the old cabinets and scratched table and chipped mug by the sink. "I kept thinking about this room," she said. "This room?" She nodded. "Is that weird?" "A little." She smiled into her hands. "I kept thinking about how quiet it felt. Not empty quiet, safe quiet. At home, even when everything looks perfect, it always feels like someone is waiting for the wrong move. Here it just feels like people can be human." My eyes landed on her then and stayed there. "People?" I asked. Color rose in her cheeks, but she did not look away. "You know what I mean." Maybe I did. Maybe I had from the start. I poured coffee for both of us and sat across from her. We talked for the next hour like people who had run out of reasons to hide the truth. She told me about the fight in full. How her father called me a distraction before he had ever met me. How her mother begged her not to embarrass the family. How Daniel tried to pull her aside and talk privately, which really meant get her alone long enough to twist her mind back into shape. "He said I was romanticizing you," she said, looking down into her mug. "Like kindness is something a person only notices when they are too naive to know better." I shook my head slowly. "That man has no idea what kindness is." "No," she said softly, "I don't think he does." Then she looked up at me and asked the harder question. "Do you think I am making a mistake?" I should have answered carefully again. Instead, I answered honestly. "I think leaving a man who makes you feel small is never a mistake. I think leaving a life that feels like a cage is not a mistake either. But coming here tonight, to me, that part matters, because I don't want to be your escape hatch, Ava. I want to be chosen or not chosen, nothing in between." For a second her face went very still. Then she stood, walked around the table, and stopped beside my chair. I turned to look up at her. She touched my jaw with one hand, gentle and sure. "Then hear me clearly," she said. "I am choosing. Not because you're easy. Not because this solves anything. Not because I know exactly what comes next. I am choosing because when I am with you, I don't feel like I am shrinking to fit somebody else's plan. There are some things a person spends years not knowing they need to hear. That was one of them." I stood up so fast the chair legs scraped the floor. She did not move back. I put my hands at her waist and searched her face one more time just to make sure. There was fear there, yes, and uncertainty. But there was also that same steady thing that had been there the first night on my porch. Once I saw it, I could not unsee it, so I kissed her again, this time slower, deeper, like we had time to feel it. Her arms slid around my neck. Mine tightened around her. The kitchen light hummed over us and the house creaked and the rain whispered at the windows. And I had the strange, clear thought that the life I had called peaceful before now felt like it had only been waiting for this. Not because love fixes everything. It doesn't. I knew that. She knew that. But because sometimes a person walks into your quiet and suddenly it becomes a place you want to share. Later, we ended up in the living room with the lamp on low and our coffee forgotten on the kitchen table. Ava sat tucked against my side on the couch with one of my old blankets over her legs. I had my arm around her mostly because I wanted it there and partly because I was still half afraid she might vanish if I let go. She rested her head on my shoulder and traced the seams in the blanket with her fingertips. "So what happens now?" I asked after a while. She was quiet long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then she said, "Tomorrow I go back to campus. I finish my semester, I find part-time work, I figure out how to be an actual adult without my father's money." A little humor slipped into her voice on that last part. "It's going to be messy." "Yeah," I said, "probably." She tipped her face up to look at me. "Does that make you want to run?" I thought about the question, about how easy it would be to say yes to a simpler life. About how for years that had been exactly what I did anytime something started to matter too much. Then I looked at her and knew that answer did not fit anymore. "No," I said. "Makes me want to buy better coffee and maybe learn how to cook something besides eggs." She laughed softly. "That bad, huh? Don't push it." We sat there smiling at each other like fools for a minute, and then the room quieted again. The kind of quiet that does not need to be filled. She shifted a little, turning more toward me, and her expression changed. Softer now, more serious. "Noah," she said. "Yeah." Her fingers curled lightly in my shirt. "Can I ask you something without you making a joke out of it?" I smiled a little, depends on the question. She gave me a look, I mean it. I sobered right away. Okay, ask. She looked down once, then back up. There was no ring on her hand now. I noticed that again and felt something deep in me settle. Then she took a breath and asked, "Is there space in your bed?" The whole room went still, not because I did not understand what she meant. I understood perfectly. She was not asking for a place to sleep. Not really. She was asking if there was room in my life for the mess she was carrying, if I meant any of what I had just said, if this house that had held only me and old memories for so long could make room for something living. I stared at her for a second, taking in the hope and fear on her face. Then I let out a breath and touched her cheek with the back of my fingers. "There is," I said quietly. "There's space in my bed, space in this house too." Her eyes shone. "And if I asked for more than one night?" I do not know where the words came from. Maybe from every lonely evening in this place. Maybe from the first time I heard her laugh in my kitchen. Maybe from the sight of her standing in the rain on my porch like trouble and mercy all at once. But once the words were there, I knew they were true. Then I'd ask if you're staying long enough to make it a forever kind of problem. For 1 second she just looked at me. Then she laughed through tears, bright and soft at the same time, and leaned forward until her forehead touched mine. "That was a terrible line," she whispered. "Yeah," I admitted. "But you liked it." I did. She kissed me once, tender this time, and I felt it all the way down to the places in me that had gone quiet years ago. Then I stood and held out a hand. She took it without hesitation. My bedroom looked the same as it always had. Small, plain. A wooden dresser, a lamp with a crooked shade, one window looking out over the dark yard. But when she stepped inside, the room changed the way the whole house had changed the first time she crossed the threshold. It felt less like a place I slept and more like a place life might actually happen in. Ava paused by the bed and looked at me with a softness I knew I would carry for a long time. "Are you sure?" she asked. I moved close enough to rest my hands at her waist. "About you," I said. "More sure than I have been about anything in a long time." We got into bed slowly, like neither of us wanted to break the feeling by rushing it. She curled onto her side facing me, one hand tucked under her cheek. I reached over and brushed my thumb along her jaw. Her eyes fluttered closed for a second, then opened again. "I don't really know how to do this part," she admitted quietly. "Which part?" "The part where something feels real and good and I don't wait for it to be taken away." That hit me harder than it should have, maybe because it sounded too familiar. I slid a little closer and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then maybe we don't think that far tonight," I said. "Maybe tonight we just sleep." Her shoulders eased. "Okay." She moved closer until her head rested against my chest. My arm went around her naturally, like it had been waiting to know where to belong. The house settled around us. Pipes clicked. Wind moved lightly through the trees outside. Her breathing slowly evened out. But before she drifted off, she said one more thing into the quiet. "I wasn't really asking about the bed, you know." I smiled into the dark. "I know. I was asking if there was space for me." I held her a little tighter. "There is." She pressed a soft kiss to my chest through my shirt. "Good," she murmured, "because I want to stay. Maybe not all at once. Maybe not in some perfect, easy way, but I want to keep coming back until this feels like mine too." That was the moment it stopped feeling like a storm story. Not because the hard parts were over. They were not. Her family would still be angry. She would still have to build a life that was really her own. I would still have my old fears and my habit of pulling back when things mattered too much. But lying there with her in my arms, I knew this much. Some people do not crash into your life to destroy it. Some people arrive like weather and end up becoming home. The next morning I woke before sunrise out of habit. For one confused second I thought I had dreamed everything. Then I felt the weight of her hand resting over my ribs and looked down. Ava was asleep against me, hair spilled across my pillow, one knee tangled with mine under the blanket. My room smelled like cedar and coffee and her shampoo. Outside, the sky was turning that pale blue that comes before full daylight. Inside, nothing felt hollow. She stirred a little and blinked up at me. Her voice was rough with sleep when she said, "Morning." I smiled before I could stop myself. "Morning." She looked around the room, then back at me, and there was that same shy hope again. "Still space." I brushed a kiss to her forehead. "Yeah," I said. "Still space." She smiled then, slow and warm, and tucked herself closer. For years I had thought peace meant being alone, keeping my world small, staying out of reach of anything that could leave a mark. Then a woman with rain in her hair knocked on my door and asked for help with a dead car. A day later she asked for honesty. A night after that she asked if there was space in my bed, and what she was really asking was whether there was room for her in the life I had built so carefully around my own loneliness. There was. Not because I had planned for her, not because she fit neatly into anything, but because sometimes the right person does not arrive when your life is polished and ready. Sometimes they arrive when the porch is creaking, the coffee is bad, the road is muddy, and your heart is still half boarded up from old damage. And somehow they look at all of it and stay anyway. If she wanted forever, I knew by then I would not be the one pulling away. I would be the one making room.